Welcome to Dragon Radio. I'm your host, M.L.Ruscsak. I'm here with my good friend and fellow author, Tina, with her beautiful book, Fancy Prison. Welcome.
Hi, ML.
Now, say your last name for the audience, please.
It's Fumo.
Okay, I didn't want to butcher it. I'm the queen of butchering names.
No, that's okay. Most English people pronounce it Fumo, but in Italian, it's Fumo.
Okay, awesome. Well, I probably would have gotten it right, but it's okay. So you have Fancy Prison out. What led you to, well, first, what is the book about?
The book is a true story. It's about an ordeal that we went through in 2017, right after my daughter had given birth to a baby girl. And the situation was extremely stressful and confusing because someone had called CPS on her, Child Protection Services, on my daughter. We're not even really sure, maybe claiming that she was a meth head or something, which it just wasn't even true. And I dropped my life to go to my the neighboring province, British Columbia, to just be there for my daughter and try to get to the bottom of what was a very confusing and stressful situation.
So I'm assuming everything is worked out now.
We got the baby back in 27 days, which, as far as these cases are concerned, is a very short time. Yeah, I can assure you, though, ML, it was the longest 27 days of my life.
I can imagine.
We just felt so exploited. And we just felt like the social workers were not working with us at all. And we just kept feeling throughout the whole ordeal, not just those 27 days, but up until about 7 months when we finally got the whole situation back in court again with the judge in our favor. We just always felt like the social workers were up to, we just didn't know what their next tricks were going to be.
Well, we have a lot of problems with the social services network. I mean, you have children that need to be taken from the home and don't. And then you have the children that are taken from the families that shouldn't be.
Yes. Yeah. I can't for the life of me understand what that imbalance is all about. I know for me, I want my taxpaying dollars going to that child who needs to get out of an abusive situation, lifted out of poverty, so that that child has development opportunities, education opportunities. That's what I want my tax dollars going for. I don't want my tax dollars going to a case like our case, where they really had no reason to be doing what they were doing, and all they were doing was hauling us into court and then coasting until they were just basically waiting for me to go bankrupt trying to support my daughter. And they almost succeeded, quite honestly. I mean, it just ended up costing me every cent I had.
I mean, we're in two different countries. So, I mean, I can't say how it is in Canada, but here in the US, I know it's atrocious how they have the network right now. It's very lopsided, you're proven guilty until you're proven innocent.
Yeah, that's the same. That's how I felt. It's the same in Canada too. We felt like we were guilty, and we had to pull together all of our resources to prove our innocence. And we had to get back a child who already, she was already our child. So why are we fighting to get back a child who already belonged to us?
Oh, I understand it completely. I mean, I know of a case here where I live. This was a few years ago. It's still back and forth in the court, and this is years. It's been in court for years.
Yes.
Where the child was taken away from the mother. Mother is actually not a person that should be having kids, has since had 2 other kids taken. And the grandparents have tried to get the child and can't, because the system says they are everything under the sun, and there's no evidence to support that.
Mm. So the
I mean,
grandparents are like me. I
yeah,
had no criminal record, no
exactly.
drugs, no alcohol, nothing. There was nothing
Mhm,
preventing the child, my granddaughter, from going to me instead of strangers,
mhm.
going to me while we worked out this mess.
Right.
And my response to that is they actually don't want to work out the mess. They actually want the child in the system because the funding follows the child.
Exactly. It's if you put a child into a parental unit that's within family, then the state or country, depending on where you're at, then pays that family member. Or they can pay a foster care family to take this child, and may not be the best foster care. They do it for the money. They don't do it for the child. Not all foster cares are like this, but a lot of them are, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think that you bring up a very good point, because when I mention to people about our case and about this book that I wrote, I still always, number one, I get this, well, I adopted kids and, their parents used drugs, and, oh, well, so-and-so, they fought to get their kids. You know what? I wrote a book about our story. It's intertwined with our friend's story, who was our advocate. There are so many different scenarios, and that is precisely the point of these cases, is that you can't approach them with a one-size-fits-all attitude. How can you possibly approach what a child's life with that kind of an attitude? That's ridiculous. Each of these, and they don't do that. Everyone's guilty, so it's a one-size-fits-all attitude,
Mhm.
and you have to prove your innocence. And these cases, they need to be taken case by case with individual, complicated, sensitive circumstances, with a child-centered model. That's what it should be.
Yes, we have to change the entire political system, because let's face it, anything that's in government is a political system. So we have to change this one system for the betterment of the child, not the betterment of the country or the government.
Yes.
We
Yes.
have to look at case by case. No two cases are the same. Even if you have two cases that are both, the parents are horrible parents, they're into drugs, they're abusing child, they're whatever, there's still other factors. Does the child have family members that are not accustomed to that lifestyle? Is there people within the family unit? It couldn't be in grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, cousin, older siblings. We have to do what's best for the child. Removing the child from the entire parental unit is not always in the best interest of the child.
I agree 100%. And I call BS on three things in my book. And my conclusion, number one, was how they take the child as a last resort. In other words, they go through all these different scenarios working with the family, and it's the last resort. I saw no evidence of that. To me, it was like, no, actually, I think it's the first thing that they do to put a tremendous amount of stress on the mother and the family. And basically we were left to pick up the shattered pieces after they had intentionally inflicted that trauma on us. The second thing that I called BS on is let me think here now, everything I put in my book, there was so many details, and it was hard to, there was so much coming at us. I called BS on the fact that they work with families. And again, I just saw no evidence of that at all, and the final thing, I think that what we were just talking about. See, it's a good thing I'm an author, because when I go off on a tangent, which I do often in this case, because there's just so many complication things, I forget what I was talking about. so
But,
writing the book was good because I could keep track of my points.
exactly. That's what we have to do. I mean, put an author in one of these situations, we're going to detail everything.
Yes.
But at the same time, someone that isn't an author is going to be out there confused and going, I didn't do anything.
Yes. Yeah. And trying to prove in a court of law on the fly how much they love their children. So I don't think that these cases belong in the court of law anyway, because that's too much power for one judge to decide on for one child. It needs to, well, I don't know what the solutions are. I just know in our case, it just doesn't belong in court. You're wasting the court's time. You're wasting the judge's time. Court, in my opinion, and traditionally was always set up to for criminals, somebody who's charged, and you go into court on the assumption that you're innocent, and it's up to the courts to prove your guilt. So if you're a murderer, you have to have evidence, obviously, the murder weapon and all those things. But it's not like that with family court. Again, you're just to assume that you're guilty just by the fact that you're in court with these charges, and you have to prove you're innocent, and it's impossible to put on paper how much you love your children. It's impossible for me as a grandmother to try to explain to a judge how much I love my grandchild and how committed I am to helping my daughter get through this ordeal. We can't put that on paper.
No, you can't. There's so many different little things you can't put on paper. What if the child is autistic? And I actually went through this with my own daughter. I had child support or child services called on me because they said I was abusing my daughter. She's autistic. So if I'm not watching, this is when she was little, if I'm not watching her constantly, yeah, she's going to get into things. So she ran her hands under hot water. Well, what does it do? It makes the skin red. So someone saw the red hands and said, I was burning my daughter's hands. No, my daughter it was cleared up in like a week, but at the same time, here's a doctor's. She's autistic. She gets into things. There's some things that are just things that, you have to show. And at the same time, an outsider isn't going to understand an autistic child. An outsider is going to judge you based on their perception of their own life. Yeah. It doesn't mean that perception is correct. And it's up to us when we're the perpetrator in this to go with our innocence and try to prove our innocence. It's not an easy thing to do, especially when you don't have any evidence of innocence because you haven't done anything wrong.
And because the court system, in our experience, was incredibly one-sided. Even if there was no, and I bring up this point in my book, I mean, one of the pet peeves with my daughter and these drug allegations was that the social workers were getting tests, like they coerced a signature from my daughter. They got a urine test from her last month of pregnancy, which are routine urine tests that the doctors usually do to check pH level. We're guessing again, because they're not really forthwith with what they're, where they're getting their information from. It came back clean. They did a umbilical cord test right after the baby was born. Again, clean. There's no evidence of her being a long time I'm not going to say the word because I don't know how to say it, but a long time meth head. And then when I arrived there, they were using the impending placenta results to further their, like, to keep digging for evidence to prove their narrative. And again, I'm already confused. I'm like, well, isn't the fact that she's telling you that she's not like, she's never used meth. She doesn't really know what these allegations are about. She's never touched the stuff and she never will.
Mhm.
Isn't that combined with the fact that you've already gotten her urine tests and her umbilical cord tests? There's nothing supporting that false claim. Why are we still in court? Like, and so it just seemed to me that they kept digging and digging and digging.
Mhm.
So, and it was all them. They could order these tests to be done on my daughter's placenta and have these tests sent out to the States. And then while the impending results, we were waiting to get them back, they're planting all these seeds of doubt in me, because what they're trying to do is get me to turn on my daughter. Like, what have you been doing? Blah, blah, blah,
Right.
So, and that didn't happen. Like, I was just so confused about their methods. And I thought, aren't you supposed to help families? Like, am I missing something here? And
It's so one-sided, and
yeah,
it's something that has to get fixed, and we have to train our social workers to take a case-by-case scenario. Now, at the same time, we have to look at from a caseworker's point of view. They may have anywhere from 25 to 100 cases per social worker.
okay.
You're overworked.
Yeah. And that actually, let's go back to this issue where someone phoned you on your child with autism, your daughter with autism. There's something in the public perception of, oh, if I call Child Protective Services, they'll sort it all out. One thing that, I need to be the good Samaritan and protect this child and call in. One thing that unfortunately I've learned from all this is that, no, I pretty much have to be sure that that parent has a knife over that child's body before and I wouldn't call Child Protective Services. I would call the police.
Exactly.
If I felt that child was in imminent danger of being harmed, I would phone the police.
Yeah, you have to look at the case by case. As a person on the outside, if you're a teacher or someone that's there to that you have to mandatory call if you suspect, okay, do you have all your facts? Is there actually a case here? If you're not a person, and they do a pretty good job in schools doing this, but if you're just a person like me and you are suspecting, do you actually have your facts in order? Are you using your own life experiences to cloud your judgment?
That's a good point. Yeah. I never even really thought of that, because I was just going to add to that, because what you're doing is you're seeing a situation and taking that one situation out of context and then presenting it to, well, I saw this and the mother's burning her child kind of thing. Whereas, they're taking that out of context because they don't know, well, there's, and children have accidents. I mean, just because a child ends up in the hospital with a broken arm doesn't mean the parent abused them. Children fall off of swings and they break things,
Exactly. How many times we're growing up in the 80s and 90s did we get bruises? How many times did we get cuts? How many times did we fall off the swings at school or have a crash with our bikes? Things happened. If you're not, we try not to have them do that now, because that's not good ways to grow up. But at the same time, that's how we grew up. What's wrong with it?
And accidents happen,
Yes.
I mean, we had a situation here with my granddaughter a couple of years ago where we had gone out for Mother's Day brunch, and she was a toddler, maybe 1, even 2 years old, and she was holding Papa's hand, because she was just this tiny little toddler. My husband's like 6 feet, and she just had a temper tantrum, and she kind of yanked her arm, and then all the while driving back, we noticed that she wasn't herself, and she seemed to be favoring her arm, and she wasn't verbal enough to be explaining that something's wrong with her arm, but we figured it out just because she seemed to be favoring it. Well, we immediately went to the hospital and took her in. And then my husband was a little surprised about one of the questions they asked was, when did she do this? And it's like, well, like an hour ago or whatever, and again, they just assume that, oh, this happened and we took a long time to report it, right? And and then another example is Suzanne, who factors heavily in my book. She was our friend and our advocate, and she helped us through this whole ordeal. I don't know what we would have done without her. But she had a friend or a family member, I'm not going to say who, just to protect their privacy, where this same thing happened. And so when that joint comes out, apparently it's called the nursemaid joint or something. The doctor had a technical medical term for it. And so this associate of Suzanne's, the same thing happened to their daughter because she was prone to it. And as soon as at the hospital, the nurses were starting to ask questions, and then there was a whisper of CPS in there. They immediately went to their lawyer, got the medical records to back up the fact that their daughter was prone to this, like a medical reason for it. And then they got the letter with the lawyer, everything all in writing, and they shut it down before it went anywhere. And that, unfortunately, is the world that we live in now, because
it is. We are constantly, as parents, under threat of having CPS called for the stupidest thing. It's not. Now, if you go back to the 80s and 90s, when the child should be taken from a parent, or even before that, it wasn't there. Well, now we overuse the system.
Yeah.
We have to get back to a good balance.
Exactly.
And it starts with, first, we have to actually, one, are you actually seeing what you think you see? Two, is the child really in danger? Or are you witnessing a temper tantrum, or did the child actually go bike riding and, heaven forbid, get a bruise or broken arm because they wrecked their bike? There's things that you have to look at objectively and without bias before you pick up the phone. Yeah.
Well, I saw no objectivity at all. So social work, and I'm not going to say all social workers. I think that there needs to be more training with the CPS.
I agree. We need more training, but we also need more CPS workers. How do we get more CPS workers? Is have it in the budget. Well, a lot of the cities don't have the budget to hire more, but at the same time, you're putting more cases on CPS workers. And out of the cases, maybe 1 or 2 in 10, there's actually cases that they need to take the child from the home.
Yeah. So I'm not gonna agree on that. I think that there has to be a better way of reporting, because I think that the financial model right now is that the more children they have in provincial custody, the more money that they get. So as soon as they get the phone call, they're not objective at all about assessing if the parent is truly a danger to the child. What they're assessing, in my opinion, with my daughter, they're assessing how isolated that parent is, how little resources that they have, how poor they have, how exploitable they are. They're not, in my opinion, doing any kind of objective investigation as to what is in the best interest of the child. And so I'm not going to agree that we need more CPS social workers. I think that there are a lot of social workers that do a lot of fantastic work, say with homeless kids, because I worked on fundraising for homeless youth. And I know that the social workers who work with a lot of these kids, trying to get them into housing and whatnot. And one of the women I dedicate my book to, Mrs. Grant, she had a background in social work. So there are lots of great social workers out there. I think right now the CPS social workers need to understand, and they just need to follow their policies, that you work with the family. Taking the child is the absolute last thing that you do. Dismissing grandparents. I mean, why were they dismissing me? I was right there. This is ridiculous, and it was just really, really confusing. And a very, very stressful situation. And like I said, we were just worried that they had more tricks up their sleeve that Suzanne didn't know about, because she'd had far more experience dealing with them than certainly me. I mean, I was just out of my element. I just had no idea that the system had deteriorated to this point. So
I mean, we take our freedoms for granted. And if we don't speak up against the freedoms we're losing because the government has all these things going on, then where are we going to be with our grandchildren when they grow up? Where are we going to be with our great grandchildren? What freedoms will they have, or will they be living in a nanny state? And we're going more and more toward a nanny state than we are freedoms.
yeah, I think that was kind of the last line of my book. It's like, oh, are we going to wake up in this horror, dystopian world, horror flick of where government owns our children and parents are reduced to baby making machines, on like a conveyor belt of baby making machines. But I am going to bring up another point though in what you said, because so this happened for 27 days. Okay, we got our granddaughter back. Circumstances happened that I think the social workers, if you went and asked those social workers now, if they would have, objectively found something wrong with my daughter, I think their answer might have been a lot different, because in the end, they saw what I was willing to do to stand by my daughter's side and how we fought them and we won. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that happens, and I mention it in my book, is this thing called birth alerts. So it's the pseudo red flag, and I'm not really sure where it comes from or how it's administered, but my granddaughter for 27 days was in foster care. So she probably has this pseudo red flag on her, even though she was only in foster care for 27 days. So just think this through with me. So let's fast forward, 20 years or whatever. She's 4 years old now. So maybe 20 years, 24. Mm-hmm. She becomes a mother herself. She goes into the hospital, not realizing this pseudo red flag is on her. And the nurses are like, oh, well, we have to call CPS. So if we don't do something about this system, that's the
system we're going to.
That's what we're looking at with my granddaughter. And that is unacceptable. Unacceptable. That is why I wrote the book. This needs to stop. Taking children away from parents who are trying and who love their children. My daughter was just struggling. She was struggling with housing. She was struggling in this horrible town she was living in. She needed to just come back home to Alberta, where she had more support, more genuine support. She just really was choosing horrible, crappy friends, but that's not a reason to take your child, Right. So that was an easy solution. Just move her closer to home where she had supports. Mm-hmm. But it was a solution that we had to come up with. Their solution was take the baby. And
right.
And they did not care at all what it did to my daughter. They didn't care, not at all.
Well, we are almost out of time, and there's so much more that needs to be said about this, because it's not going to be a simple solution.
No.
And the governments across the board need to find a better solution. But at the same time, where can our listeners and our viewers find you to continue the conversation?
Oh, I have first buy my book. It's out as an ebook right now, and I'm just working on the publisher now to get it printed soon on paperback. So it can be found on Amazon. Just search Fancy Prison by Tina Fumo. My email is www.gentlegiants.academia.edu. So I'll spell that out for you. So www.gentlegiants. So after we went through this whole ordeal, I was shell shocked. This is war on families, and I was extremely shell shocked. And what I wanted to do with the book was just help families, give them hope, and give them a sense of, you're not crazy. Actually, the system is crazy. And these are some tangible steps perhaps that will work with you.
Mhm.
So I started a charity called Gentle Giants. Okay, so that's the website, www.gentlegiants.academia. So that's the platform. It's an educational platform.
And all these
Academia.
links too will be in the comment section. If you're watching or listening, they're in the comment section. So you just click on the link or look above us, and the website will be above our heads. We are almost out of time, so I do want to thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me, LM. Sorry, ML.
It's okay. You're
I should have.
very passionate about this, as you should
I
be.
am.
So messing up my name is fine, really.
Yeah, I should have just called you Melissa from the start. It's such a pretty name, and you look like a Melissa. Yeah.
You. So
How old's your daughter now? Do you mind me asking?
she is 18 now.
She's 18 now.
She's 18. By year, she's 18. In social skills, she's 8. In academics, she's like 25.
Oh, wow. So she's a reader.
She is.
She's very literal. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an 8-year-old trapped in a 25-year-old's body or something like that. So, but yeah, she's my angel. So
yeah, she would be. Yeah.
But for all of our readers and our listeners, happy reading.